You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello everybody. I'm Eric Vansel,
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
and we're your hosts for this show on like an off day, off time. It's like Tuesday. It's like after 9:30. We even said we were going on at 9. It's like, see, this is why hitting that notification bell is so important because a lot of times this happens, right? We can't make this a full time
Mm-hmm.
gig yet, so unfortunately, can't always go on when we want to go on. But I do want to open this because when we're talking about the most underrated character of the original trilogy, again, we're only doing one. This is not some top 5, top 10, whatever. We're
Mm-hmm.
each going to give one and then, I guess defend it. And then from there, maybe discuss like other characters that possibly mention. Obviously, if anybody has their notification bells turned on and they're watching us, then obviously you guys can chime in. If you're watching it after the fact, of course you can chime in after the live stream is over, and you can just put it in the comment section. That's fine too. Now we should probably maybe open this because Grandmaster sent a chat like when this is supposed to start. He basically said, Daryl, what is your definition of underrated? So I think that's a really good one. And by the way, Ted, I had to put this one up because this is good. He's like, what? Like Ted, he didn't even realize, and that's why he says, "Glad I have my notifications turned on." Right,
There you
Ted.
go. That's right, Ted.
You know, be like Ted. Turn on your notifications. All right, so let's address Grandmaster's thing. What we did come up with this topic. Obviously, we came up with the slide on the last show. It's just like, hey, that was a good idea, so we ended up doing it. So, what are we talking?
So when I say underrated, I mean characters that I won't say that, most people would think like underrated, like, they were cool, but like, you didn't see a whole lot of them. They didn't have a whole lot to do with the plot. What I mean by underrated is it could be either or, whichever one you want. But I guess in my mind, I'm thinking of their contributions to the story. Some people may look at certain characters and they could be a main character, but they're still underrated. Like people just may like, and I'll just, make this up. But C3PO, it's like, oh, he was, an underrated character. Now C3PO is a main character, however, some people might make the argument that he's an underrated character in the whole trilogy. So you can defend that answer. Some people might even take uh Palpatine, because in the original trilogy we don't get to him till Return of the Jedi. Really, you really don't feel him until the Return of the. And he's a huge character in the whole Star Wars story. Maybe in the original trilogy you felt like he was kind of underrated because we really didn't get to him until the Return of the Jedi. And then
Well,
even then,
to stop
so
you there,
that's what I mean. Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, that's a good point though, because when you look at the Star Wars saga as a whole, it essentially is talking about the rise and fall of Anakin Skywalker. I mean, that's essentially what it is. And then Luke,
The whole saga, yes, and it's a
yeah,
total,
in
yeah,
the
absolutely,
in the whole saga in its totality, that's what it is, right? And
right.
so then when you isolate the original trilogy, obviously he's Darth Vader. It really becomes more like the redemption of Darth Vader, who once was Anakin Skywalker. If you're just looking at it through the lens of the original trilogy and not the
Mm-hmm.
saga as a whole. But
Correct.
you could actually make the argument that Palpatine is underrated in the sense of, because again, and I remember you even saying when we came up with this last time, the idea was, you know, how did they adversely affect the story? That was kind of the main point I think you were trying to go after was like you
Mm-hmm.
said, it wasn't like a popularity thing. You know, it
Mm-hmm.
was really like, okay, did this person have an underrated effect or impact on the story and people
Mm-hmm.
overlook them? I mean, this could have actually easily have been called most overlooked character of the original trilogy. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
but it's good that we put it as underrated because it's sort of like, yeah, you know, it's somebody that had an impact on the story, but yet, you know, people don't necessarily think of them. And you could say,
Yeah.
well, look at the impact Palpatine did have on the story. And of course, if you factor in the entire saga, I mean,
Well, yeah.
that really becomes apparent. But if you're just looking at the
Mm-hmm.
original trilogy, like you said, in A New Hope, he's just mentioned by name. In Empire
Mm-hmm.
Strikes Back, you just see a hologram of him. You don't really see anything or have any appreciable interaction with this character until Return of the Jedi. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on that because I think that that's something that definitely is in line with what we're talking about.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, because I mean, you could look at, like I said, R2D2. It's like, okay, well, he's, you know a main character, or 3PO, or any of those. And I mean, some people might say, you have Lobot down here. You might, and some people might feel like, oh well, without Lobot this didn't happen, or Lobot was, did something. It could be anybody that you really want to highlight. So um that's what's going to make this interesting.
Well, as a spoiler alert, too, that's probably what everybody thinks mine's going to be. Like, if you watch this show,
You do tend to bring up
I
Lobot a
do
lot. That's
tend to
like one of
bring
your
up Lobot. Yeah,
guys.
I bring him up a lot, and I always say that he's basically underappreciated, and
Hmm.
that he was a key character. I mean, it would actually be within what I think most people would think if they're seeing this, going, "Okay, we're gonna hear about Lobot again." And sir, I can definitely make the case for that. He's not the one that I'm picking, actually.
Hmm.
Although I thought about picking him early on when you first did that, precisely because, yeah, I mean, he does play a pivotal role in, you know, and moving the story forward and stuff like that, and people don't necessarily think about him. And then, of course, once you expanded, there was like a Lobot comic series actually
Yeah, it
that
was
really goes in.
a
Then
really
there was,
brief one. Yeah.
yep, then there was like expanded universe thing that talks about him even more, and even in the new canon, there was a few novels that pretty much talk about him. So really, you could do that even within the scope, because we are keeping this to the original trilogy. But you could do that in the scope of the original trilogy. But
Yeah, because
I just,
originally I thought about it about movie, like I thought about, like, okay, well, in A New Hope, who's the the underrated,
yeah, and I
maybe do.
remember we were
I
talking
thought
about
about doing
that.
about, but I was just like, what, let's just because we can do you know the trilogy, so we'll just do
Well,
the
and
original
this is
trilogy.
actually more difficult.
It is, because now you have to think of way more characters and really
Well, you
factor all that
also
in.
and you also have to think of, because one of the key components here is the impact on the story. You actually have to think of,
Correct.
like, who actually impacted the original trilogy. But yet
Hmm.
he's either overlooked, underappreciated, underrated, however you really want to put it is fine. But yeah, I think that that's something that is definitely worth exploring. And another thing that I should point out before we get into this, we didn't discuss it with each other behind the scenes like we do a lot of
No,
times.
no,
So this is going to
that's
be
wrong.
actually a very new discussion, right? Because we didn't
Yeah,
share.
this no. That's what I'm trying, chomping at the bit to hear what you got to say. Like, who? That's why you're going
Well,
first.
I'm kind of wondering too, like, because I didn't even think about this until just now, but there's a danger we could have picked the same guy or girl or droid,
Yeah,
you know?
non-binary.
Yeah, I mean, right. Yeah. I mean,
It's a
it,
one time that I could never mind. Okay.
I know exactly. Right. The one time that you can actually say that, yes.
Ugh.
Yeah, I don't know. That's going to be interesting, but I mean, what are the odds? But knowing us, it's possible. It's entirely possible.
The thing is that when you think of for me, I don't know about you, but like for me, this was like difficult because it's actually like more people than you think that
Yes.
when you really
Yes.
stop and think
Because
about
off
it,
of the top of my
it's
head,
more people than you really
yeah,
think.
there really are. Because especially there's a few characters other than the one that I picked that you could say, no, this character monumentally affected the story, and yet nobody brings that character up in that discussion.
Mm.
And there's a few, and there's also like a few. I mean, there's just a lot. It's true to varying degrees, of course. So I
Hmm.
mean, there definitely is like when you really stop and break this down and you think about it, you're like, wow, okay, this is actually more difficult than I thought it would be. And that's where I think that if we had done it by film instead of by trilogy, it's like that would have lightened the load because now you can put forth three characters and you can say, okay, you know, and we can talk about it too when we actually reveal our characters. It's like, well, if we had done it by movie, even the characters that we pick, you might go, oh, well, if it had been my movie, this character would have been maybe like I don't know in A New Hope
Hmm.
more so than anything else, and then you can go and say who was the most in Empire and then Return of the Jedi. But when you actually have to do it by the entire trilogy, that's crazy. That was yeah, it
Yeah,
was it was difficult for me. I'll admit. I went back and forth actually. I thought about like I said,
man.
I thought about doing Lobot.
I still going back and forth. Like even at this very moment, like I have, I mean, I I have like three really in my head. But I'm basically bouncing between like, okay, am I going to say A or B? But
You know what this is
since
like?
I
This is like when you're at a restaurant with a bunch of friends, right? You got it
oh
down
yeah,
between
I
like
already know
three
what you're about to
dishes,
say.
and it's
Yes,
kind of like you're like, I don't know. Why don't you guys go first? And by the time it gets to
yo,
me, I'll just
gets
blurt
me.
something out, And it's like, and then finally, it's like, okay, sir. Well, what about you?
uh,
And you're like, all right, I have to do it now. So I
just give me
mean,
this.
yeah, right,
Right,
right. Sometimes it even becomes something you weren't even thinking of.
right.
Well, all
That's
right
exactly
then.
what that's like.
I guess it's time.
Yeah. Do we at first before you go? Do we have anybody who's submitted theirs yet?
No, nobody's submitted theirs.
Okay.
Um, there are, I mean, people
I'm
miraculously,
sure
even
people
though,
will. Yeah.
well, they're watching. There's a
Mm.
couple people watching right now. Probably Ted, maybe Grandmaster. Like I said, Ted pretty much had chatted when we were on. Grandmaster did chat, opening it with, the definition of underrated,
Of
but it was a
underrated,
little
right?
while ago, so I don't know if he's like back on or not. It would be interesting though if somebody else, depends on how much I can draw this out to give people time, but without people like going crazy. But it's like, yeah, if anybody really wants to put in the chats, like what your choices are,
Right.
um, we
By all
can,
means.
yeah, we can talk about that too. I mean, I guess while we're waiting for that to see if there is anybody, is there a particular set of criteria or something that you used? Um,
Yeah, I think I looked at. Um, of course, the main thing is their effect on the story.
yeah.
Um, their how often did we see them? Um, I also looked at uh, more. I don't want to say maybe their popularity or what did they actually do? Like, there's their impact, like how it affected the story, but what was the thing that they did? If that makes sense. So, like, those are kind of like my measurables, if you will,
Yeah, and that's
of
pretty
kind of
much,
like.
I mean, that pretty much mirrors what I did too. It's like, it pretty much came down to, okay, what are, like you said, the impact they had on the overall story? How often do we see them? What did they actually do? How did they affect the other characters around them?
That's a good one.
It's, there's just like a lot, and that's the thing is that I narrowed it down. I was gonna do Lobot, and then I decided, yeah, but that would be so obvious for me. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
I
such an
guess if
Eric.
somebody, I guess if somebody was a new viewer, they wouldn't necessarily, they'd be like, really, never. But I mean, people that have watched us for a while, yeah, everybody's gonna think I did that. I actually almost did C3PO too, as well, by the way. But I,
Every time I look at this picture of Lobot, he always looks like Locutus of Borg.
he does, he really does. I mean, that's pretty funny because he does. All right, well, Ted says I am struggling. They all seem to get their due attention after all these years. Well, that's true too.
Mm.
Everyone is someone's favorite, even the characters that were in screen only for seconds, like the bounty hunter. Then he goes on to say,
Yeah.
I bet all the characters in the original trilogy have had at least one book or comic dedicated to just them.
You know what? He might not be wrong. Well, at least the majority of them. I mean, I don't think I've
Well,
seen like a nine numb, comic, but
I may
like,
have, or at least one that features them heavily. Because if you think about it, man, if you're starting to see like comics of Lobot, it's sort of like, all right,
we're
we're
at the bottom
getting
of the
there. I mean, there
barrel.
was like a Hammerhead one. And Snaggletooth, I think, was even featured in something. I don't,
Wow, that's
there's
crazy.
like a lot of, because that's the other thing too. It's like, the problem with somebody like Hammerhead, yes, you can argue that, okay, somebody's favorite. They did eventually do like a comic series on them and all that, but they wouldn't necessarily, Hammerhead doesn't fit the criteria of what we are ranking as an underrated character. Watch you go, well, actually, that's my guy. But I mean,
Right.
it's one of those deals where they're, even if you tried to spin it, like for instance, if you said Walrus Man, and I forgot the other dude's name that was
Pig
with him.
nose.
Yeah, yes, those guys. Okay, if you wanted to just say, take them as one, pretty much, you could make the argument, for instance, that they did. I mean, Obi-Wan actually kind of revealed, the lightsaber. I mean, it's like the first time that we see it. It's like there's this altercation that basically pushes Luke a little bit closer to where he needs to be in order for Obi-Wan to convince him, hey, you got to go and follow me and leave your old life and begin this new life. There was a life lesson. Now, again, I'm not really suggesting that that's the case. I'm just saying that somebody could probably make that argument, and maybe even because I don't feel that way, it doesn't necessarily mean it couldn't be articulated in such a way that somebody might
Mhm.
have you going, you got a point. But I think that I'm sure, and I don't even know who you picked, but I'm sure that whoever it is probably has more weight than those guys. The same.
Yeah, yeah.
Unless, of course, I ended up revealing the pick.
I'm like, oh man, you. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Which, of course, would render the entire like thing that I just said, useless and make me
Right.
look like an idiot.
Well, I guess Eric, all you have to do is give yours now.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I mean, I do think that it is something that when you really look at, that's why I'm glad that you established some of these criteria, because you could take this from, the certain points of view type of a thing, where you could say, well, this character is underrated because of X, Y, and Z, and you go, oh, okay, but we're establishing parameters around this. Like, okay, it really has to be somebody that falls within this in order to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, to quote Poe Dameron, I go first, you go first.
Yeah, definitely on you, my friend.
All right. So it was actually between two characters for me. But I honestly have to go with Lando.
That was one of mine. That's funny.
I gotta go with Lando. The other one I was gonna do was R2D2. Funny that you bring him up.
Okay.
Even C3PO I was actually going for. So here's the order that when I thought about this. Lobot obviously was first, and I was going to do it. I was going to once again make my case for him. But when I was really stopping to think about it, I could still make the case for Lobot, but I think like Lando is stronger. And he still falls within the underrated thing because everybody goes to like Luke, Han, and Leia. But yet, you know, Lando, after initially betraying everybody, he actually goes and he he realizes his mistake. He turns against the Empire. I mean, if he hadn't done what he did in Empire Strikes Back, Leia and Chewie probably wouldn't have made it out. And then, of course, they end up, picking up Luke and all that. Then, of course, he ends up going to rescue Han Solo. He destroys the second Death Star. I mean, there's like a lot that this guy did that's seriously impactful in the story. And people tend to blow over him. It's weird because he falls into that category you're talking about. He's definitely a main character. I mean, he was featured pretty prominently. Obviously, he wasn't in A New Hope, but he was, Empire and Return of the Jedi. I mean, he was right there with those guys. And then, of course, he pops up in the sequel trilogy. He pops up in a lot of the animated shows. There's just like been volumes of comics and novels written about him. He was very
even in the Solo.
the Solo movie, right?
Yep.
He was heavily featured in the expanded universe. So I mean,
if you really want to go take it there, he's also the one who gave us the Millennium Falcon. If you really want to think about it, right? Without Lando, Han would have never had the Falcon. So
exactly,
and that's some like iconic shit. I mean, that's almost like its own character too.
Yeah, and then of course, when you think of like, I mean, even a lot of like the whole Bespin thing, Bespin is tied to him. The cloud, twin pod cloud cars are basically tied. That's kind of like Lando's domain. I mean, so he had a lot of juice in that sense.
Definitely.
So that's pretty much I think where I'm gonna go with that, even though there were the three other ones that I was thinking. And then even since then, when we're done and we've given some of our stuff, and there's even some other honorable mentions that we can talk about, including ones that we can argue against.
Why do you think that people didn't, or why do you think most people kind of overlook Lando?
I mean, I think that he's just basically
he's
like exactly like I think.
I think we all know why.
Yeah, I think we all know. I think it's pretty abundantly clear why. But I think the problem that Lando has is that he's kind of like a character actor when they're in a movie. Is that they sort of blend into the background and the scenery. Like Lando, it's very much an ensemble cast by the time Lando gets there. Because there's also contributions, like I said, by R2 and 3PO. There's Chewbacca. Chewbacca does a lot of stuff. I mean, if somebody actually want to bring up Chewbacca as an argument, like, hey, I think he's the most underrated. I can make that case too. And I think what ends up happening is Lando his accomplishments are tied very inexorably to what the big three are doing. Because if you think about it, yes, he's blowing up the second Death Star. He's the guy that did it. But part of a bigger assault, that the main characters are also on the ground. It's basically, I don't know. It's like you get this ensemble vibe going with him. And I think that that's the whole point. That he's underrated because I don't think people see him very individually, even though, I mean, you could easily say that.
Okay.
All right, we got some more chat, so before you go, let's get these in here. Universal basically says my pick is Obi-Wan.
Okay.
But you gotta defend it though.
Yeah. Right.
You gotta defend it because and again, remember we're talking original trilogy here, so you cannot factor in the prequels, the Clone Wars, any of
Hmm.
that. Although I guess you could argue that if you did factor in all that, well, then he kind of loses his underrated status at that point. I mean, if you think about it, Obi-Wan's a pretty big component in there, and
In the whole saga, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
in the original trilogy, I don't know, and I also wonder too. I also wonder if people are colored by the fact that they've seen all of that.
Hmm.
Because that's another thing you got to look at too. You're only looking at the original trilogy, so you basically have to pretend it's like 1984 or something, where only the original trilogy has been
Really
released.
exists. Yeah.
Yeah, who's the most underrated character there? Because if you start trying to factor in, because we've just been so hardwired with all of these other projects, I don't know. And of course, Grandmaster, thinks that Universal has a good point. Maybe, maybe not. All right, go for it.
Okay, so my number, I'll do what you did. My number three would have been Lando. Um, so we've already discussed that,
Hmm.
so we don't need to really go over that. So Lando's my number three. My number two would have been Wedge.
That's funny that
Um,
you bring Wedge up because Wedge is like, remember how I said I had a bunch of honorable mentions?
that's one
Yeah,
of your
he's
honorable
he's
mentions.
yeah, he's one of the honorable mentions.
And it's funny because ironically, my number one is Obi-Wan. So
Wow. All
yeah,
right.
so I can't speak for Universal, but here's my defense. Um, Obi-Wan Kenobi is, I think people kind of look over or gloss over the fact that one, he's kind of the narrator, if you really stop and think about it, of the original trilogy. He's kind of our guide and kind of walks us through a lot of the things that we need to know. And even though his character dies off very early, so it's kind of like, and I think that's why he's so underrated because we don't see him really in action a lot. We saw him once against Vader, and that was a pathetic. Okay, I'm gonna just tap my little lightsaber against yours, and then all right, well this is not working. I guess I'm gonna just give it on up, and we know the rest. However, in his Force Ghost form, um, he definitely impacts the story because he moves like even when in A New Hope after he dies, he he's the one who comes to Luke and is like, hey, Luke, trust the Force, and to fire the shot. So that was the thing, and that's what allowed him. Even Vader's like, oh, the Force is strong with this one. That was Obi-Wan he was feeling, and then on top of that, um, when we get to Empire, when he's the one who tells him, hey, okay, look, I can't really do what I need to do because I'm dead, but go see Yoda. He's on Dagobah. Okay. Sends Luke on his next mission, next journey. And then even after that, he kind of starts to, he shows up when Luke is trying to go save his friends. And he was even trying to tell him, like, hey, look, you're going to be tempted. I can't help you. You kind of have to do this on your own, kid. He's, you know, don't underestimate him, all that stuff. And he gives us our first explanation of what the force is. Okay, you can't just keep saying this thing, the force, and it's like you don't explain it. He's the one who does it. He explains a lightsaber to us. It's an elegant weapon for and it's not as clumsy as the blaster, and it's for and it's a Jedi's weapon. So, we kind of like he kind of narrates the story for us, and then especially when we get to Return of the Jedi, that's when we find out the whole twist of like, oh no, like he's your father. He's really your father. Oh, well, you lied to me. Well, no, I didn't really lie to you. I just kind of told you this story from a certain point of view. And then also, you got a sister, and it's just kinda like, wait, what? Yeah. So again, I think Obi-Wan's impact, especially for Luke, who really is, the main character for the most part, is, I mean, he definitely impacts him in that whole story, but because of that, that kind of sets the trajectory for the entire um, trilogy. Even Vader said, like, well, Obi Wan can no longer help him. And it's like, no, but he still can. And even showing us the fact that there's life after death and for a Jedi in Star Wars. It's just so much that he offers and brings to the table as far as like narration, explaining things to us, showing us things as far as within the Force. Um, yeah, Obi Wan.
Well, here's a question then, because
Mm-hmm.
in this, as you're bringing all this up, it's probably a good time to distinguish this because I could see somebody maybe making this argument against this. I wouldn't necessarily do it, but I could see somebody doing it. What is the difference then between underrated and just important? Because a lot of what you bring up shows that he's a very important character, but is he necessarily underrated? In other words, is he really, because I could swing the other way. Again, that's why I say I wouldn't necessarily make the
Sure.
argument myself,
Play the devil's advocate to it. Yeah.
but I could see where somebody might. It's not even me playing the devil's advocate. It's really more like I could see this would be a criticism of that character, right? Because everything that you just did contained within the original trilogy. Nothing went outside. You're not factoring any of the other stuff, which is what I think a lot of people would do right off the bat. So, you know, all the reasons that you gave, though,
Mm-hmm.
I could see somebody going, well, okay, that makes him important, not necessarily underrated. Now, again, I would probably turn around and say, okay, that's true, but at the point of the original trilogy, see, this is where I think if you factored in the prequels and all that, it would probably be a valid point because I
Mm-hmm.
don't think he's underrated once you factor all that in.
Oh, 100%. I agree with that.
But if you are looking at the original trilogy, where I think that it shifts from just important because he was important to the whole story to the underrated aspect is probably something along the lines of, well, a lot of what he did, like for instance, the exposition part of it, right? Revealing
Mm-hmm.
all the elements or serving as like a segue between different things and things like that. I don't think people really necessarily pick up on that. And then, of course, the second thing is some of the stuff that he does, I think people might attribute to other characters, right? Like, for an example, when you talk about when Luke shot the proton torpedo, people would point to, oh, Luke blew up the Death Star. Well, yeah, he did, but he didn't really think he could until Obi-Wan said, hey, man, you got to trust your feelings and use the Force and all that other stuff. And so sometimes, you might get a little bit overlooked as far as what he's doing, even though he's actually important. And I think that that's where the distinction between underrated and importance comes in. But it is a good idea to always say, you got to be careful because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes somebody might latch onto a certain character and will demonstrate that that character was very important to the story, but not necessarily underrated in that sense.
Fair. That's
But with
fair.
Obi-Wan one, I think that you can, definitely, because even if you wanted to just cut it down and say, okay, fine, makes people feel any better, Ben Kenobi is unrelated or is underrated, right? Like old Ben. That's
Okay.
that's the underrated part because now we've had so much stuff with the younger and more middle-aged Obi-Wan. We almost think of him as another character. Like everybody almost
Mhm.
forgets about the old Ben Kenobi thing. Like it's actually
Yeah.
weird it's so funny how this works. It is weird to call him Ben Kenobi,
Mm-hmm.
whereas before it was, even though we all knew his name was Obi-Wan, it was weird to call him that. Because we had the original trilogy, he was Ben Kenobi. So I
Yeah.
that's where I would probably like go, okay, that would be my defending your point.
Well, to piggyback off of that, and what I would say to most people is, I think the reason what makes Obi-Wan underrated is just because of one, like I said, my criteria. As far as screen time, we really don't get a whole lot of him. I mean, sure, in A New Hope, he takes up, a substantial part of the screen time. I'll grant that. But after that, it's like, okay, he's around, but he kind of becomes a background character because you're so focused on what's going on with Luke and Han and Leia, and especially like once Yoda enters the picture, and now you have this sage, or like you thought Obi-Wan was the guy. No, this little frog dude, yeah, no, he's it. I mean, this guy is like talking backwards and lifting up ships out of the swamp, like, and he's really like showing you like the power of the force. I mean, Obi-Wan did a little mind trick on that stupid stormtrooper. This guy is lifting out stuff out of a whole swamp. So I think that's kind of why, you know, even when you start talking about the greatest Jedi of all time, like a lot of people forget Obi-Wan because, he
Yeah.
wasn't on the E. It's like everybody thinks about Mace, everybody thinks about Yoda, everybody thinks about Plo Koon even over Obi-Wan, but it's like Obi-Wan is actually pretty powerful. And that's why even in his own series, it's like that's when you start to see, like when he had that scene when he finally decided, like, okay, the gloves come off, Vader. I really gotta give it to you. And you see him like, summon all the rocks, and he just started just shooting them at him. You're just like, okay, Obi-Wan, all right. And it's because he plays himself more humble. He's that guy. So he doesn't want the spotlight. So that's kind of why he's often overlooked. And he's not a Qui-Gon who's going to run out to the front. Mm-mm. I'm in the back. I know who I am. I know what I can do. Even with Anakin, he's like, Anakin's always got to show off. I mean, that's just Obi-Wan is always, even he told him, he's like, no, this is your time in the sun. Like, you go. And that's what I'm saying. Like that's why he's so underrated is because he makes himself that way. It's an intentional thing on his behalf, and so that's why I would say that he's a lot of times he's overrated, and people really don't pay that much attention to him or realize when you stop and think about it, you're like, well, yeah, but most people really aren't thinking about it because you're so focused on how cool Han is, how, like, oh, Luke is so powerful now and Leia's so spunky and fiery. You kind of Obi-Wan, and then of course Yoda's like Yoda. So Obi-Wan kind of falls into the background.
Well, I mean, let's not get carried away. It's not like he's Ray.
Well,
No, I mean that's basically all. That's all true in the sense of, especially because, yeah, people do have a tendency. It's funny. I think that changes when you factor in the prequels, the Clone Wars. I
hmm
think then he ceases to be more of a background character, and people start to go, "Oh yeah."
yeah,
But
because
right,
he's a general and he was, one of the guys they always sent out there
yeah, he
on
was
the
one of the
front line.
main
He's a
guys,
negotiator. That's what they called him. So
right? And so
yeah.
basically, and you see a lot more content and all that stuff. So he's not
hmm
pushed in the background as much. But it's true when you factor in the original trilogy. All right, so I had Lando ultimately. You have Obi-Wan. Now let's see.
Yep.
We do have some chats. Let me read and see what we got going on here. Ted says, "Okay, I got my pick now. All the hardworking fighters in the rebellion who did the hard work to get to the point that our band of merry misfits could swoop in and save the day. But
Yeah.
then he also points out, of course, we do have Rogue One and Andor, right? Which does somewhat give that nod to those guys. It basically focuses on the rebels versus the Empire, but more so the boots on the ground, the military, more the
Hmm.
war, not the lore. Okay, Travis. Travis joins us. He says, "How's it going, guys? Lando for me." So he's another
There you go.
Lando guy. All right, cool. The guy who openly defies Vader to his face with everything to lose, gets away, gets his people and new friends to safety, then blows up the Death Star. So pretty much the points that
Hmm.
I had made on that when I chose Lando, absolutely. And then he says, for a long time, it was rare to see Lando on merchandise, art, or posters, despite kind of being the fourth lead of the trilogy
That's
for a
true.
bit. It almost felt like it was done on purpose.
I think we
Um,
know
and
why.
I mean the thing is, yeah, he was kind of the first guy when you really stop and think about it that did. I mean, you had the secondaries, right? Like you had Chewbacca, you had 3PO and R2, but it
Hmm.
really was about Han, Luke, and Leia. And then Empire comes along, and now you had this other guy who at first you're thinking is just going to be like somebody who pretty much betrays you, you know? And then it's like that's what he was used for, and then they were going to move on. But then he ends up, yeah, kind of becoming the fourth guy. And that's the way he pretty much presents himself in Return of the Jedi. And that is when the expanded universe like went really crazy with it too, because Lando really became like super prominent in the
Hmm.
expanded universe novels to the point where it was Han, Luke, Leia, and Lando. So, you know, you definitely have to factor that in as well. Travis goes on to say, well, not underrated, overlooked, and forgotten about Uncle Owen. When we see Luke in The Last Jedi, he's jaded, living off the land. He became who he was raised to be over who he aspired to be. That's kind of an interesting point. I mean, you could, and again, Uncle Owen starts to pop up a little bit in the prequels, and then, of course, in the Obi-Wan series, start to learn a lot. This almost goes back to Ted's original point where it's like, look, I mean, this is going to be hard to do because like virtually every character in this original trilogy has their own something. It's like there's been a comic released about them, a novel, something. But it's not even about like the pop culture aspect or the, what everybody grew to be or, because look, I mean, the franchise is pretty much like 50 years old. It's kind of like I'm sure the story group's like, okay, we got to do another comic series. Is there like anybody we haven't done something on yet? Can we, you know, now I'm starting to like, now you're really going to get to the,
Owen
you know,
Lars the Butcher,
yeah, pretty much, or it's like, well, let's
or
take a
the
look at some
farmer.
of those holiday special characters. You got to, like
Yeah.
B. Arthur's bartender, a Star Wars story, something like
Well,
that.
I mean, Owen and Baru are like Martha and Jonathan Kent. I
Yeah.
mean, that's,
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Without, any question. And there are different elements, and much like how in the Superman series where, for decades, they were just kind of the beginning, characters that where you see Superman's origin story and then he goes off and then that's it. But starting with stuff like Smallville and things like that, it's sort of like they became prominent characters themselves to the point where you were actually invested in their stories. Travis says, one reason I appreciate the Disney era, Lando gets his due. Unlike Legends where he was barely used. I don't agree with that at all. Legends, dude, he was all over the place in that.
yeah.
He really was. I mean, sure, um, it did start to focus a little bit on the offspring where you had Jason and Jaina Solo and, and everything like that. And I mean, you did
But like
have,
right after Return of the Jedi, though, yeah, he was definitely
yeah, I mean, there was a lot in, in the Timothy Zahn novels, and sure, I guess you could probably go back, analyze, and say, well, page wise, but him and Talon Card were often, paired up together because they're kind of similar characters, actually. And Lando did have a lot to do. Now, it's true from a from a certain standpoint, you could say that there were certain book series that minimized him more than others. So you could actually make the argument in certain storylines didn't feature him. But for the most part though, he was there. He was there, he was doing his thing. Um but I do think that is true. Travis goes
I
on
have a
to
question
say,
for you.
huh?
So I have a question for you, Eric.
All right.
For when the original trilogy was in, excuse me, when the original trilogy was in theaters, when you all found out that Billy D. Williams was going to be in the film, was he a name at that point where you guys were like, ooh, or was he just kind of like,
Well, to
because it's not
us,
like Harrison Ford, like Harrison Ford had been in some stuff, but he wasn't Harrison Ford yet.
right.
So was Billy D along the same lines at
No,
that
he
time,
had a
or
he
was he
had a
did he have more of a
name.
name?
No, he had a name, but
Okay,
I mean, it was more relevant to people who were older than like us 10-year-olds.
okay.
Like I didn't know. I mean, you found out.
It's almost like saying like, oh, Sidney Poitier is going to be in this
Yeah,
or something.
exactly.
Got you.
Even though back
Okay.
then I knew
I
who
mean,
he was more than,
yeah,
but I mean, yeah, it's like somebody who did have a name, but it wasn't. I mean, it was almost like
got you.
trying to think of a couple of the other ones. Well, Alec Guinness. Alec Guinness had a name. He was in a bunch of movies. One of my favorites being The Bridge Over the River Kwai. Um, and he was in a ton of stuff beforehand, but we didn't know who he was. Now my parents did, and that's kind of how it was. Parents, aunts, and uncles, yeah, they're all like, "Oh wow, Billy D. Williams is going to be in this movie." Like he had a little bit of a marquee. He wasn't like a
Okay.
superstar, but he did have a marquee name.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, in fact, that was one of the things that was kind of interesting is that all right. Travis says going off the Lando thing. It was kind of the same with Ghostbusters. Ernie Hudson was often excluded from posters, which confused me as a kid. Was he part of the team, just as Lando is in many ways? That's actually a good little
Yeah, that's a
thing
comparison.
because it is seen as like Ghostbusters is always seen as a big three. And then if you remember in the story, it's
Mhm.
like those three guys, were like, they were they're kind of like together all the time. They were trying to do this amateur ghost busting thing. Then they decide, they're going into business to do it, and then they hire Ernie Hudson, his character a little later in the like Ray, I think it was. They hire him a little later. That wasn't Ray. That was Aykroyd. But that's why I think he wasn't seen. It's very much like how Lando was, right? They were sort of like add-on characters to the original team. So like halfway through Ghostbusters, they hire Ernie Hudson's character, so he's sort of seen as like the new guy. Lando,
Mhm.
even though he was initially a villain, he becomes good. Okay, he's sort of seen as like the new guy that you meet, you know. So the core group meet this new guy, and now he's part of the team. But you still see the core group as the core group plus one, So I think that's where that comes in. And then Travis goes, I know Billy is famous for Mahogany, Brian's Song, and a very underrated movie with Stallone, Nighthawks. Yeah, I forgot he was. Nighthawks was a great. Um, Yeah, so like I said, he was he had a name, but I mean, he wasn't some superstar guy. All right,
Gotcha.
let me do some honorable mentions on my part here. Uh, so a couple other ones I had. Admiral Akbar, you
Mhm.
know, he realized that it was a trap. He had all the ships pull up, so they weren't all annihilated by the shield generator that was actually operational. That was kind of a pivotal thing. Wedge Antilles was another one that I had. What did I say? He was one of the few rebel pilots to survive both Death Star battles. He destroyed the regulator during the Battle of Endor. He made the Death Star's destruction possible. So he's a big one. General Maydean, people forget about him. He's the guy that was really leading the ground assault against the shield generator. Again, I'm not going to sit there and make these people my choice, because part of what made these honorable mentions different from what you and I chose is you and I showed that throughout the entire original trilogy story arc, they actually were making difference after difference after difference, versus say, okay, this guy is responsible for one pivotal moment, but people forget about that. Mon Mothma, another one. You know, I mean, one that I think some people might actually. This, remember, I said I was going to argue against one,
Mhm.
because usually if you bring this up, people will bring up Boba Fett, and it's like he really isn't underrated though, because it's like, in fact, you could almost make the argument he's overrated when you actually look at the story. But he's, from day one, he was one of the most celebrated characters in the entire original trilogy. He's a guy that you would argue was more impactful and perhaps important, but certainly not underrated. In fact, when you really look at what he was doing in the story and everything else, and nobody's going to take away that he was impactful and important, but you can almost say he was overrated. That guy, he was totally celebrated, just completely. Like, everybody worshipped at the feet of Boba Fett since the holiday special. I mean, I
The
remember.
cartoon, yeah, I mean, yeah,
Well, yeah, there was the little cartoon thing, but I remember that Boba Fett was actually introduced as an action figure from the quote unquote upcoming, Empire Strikes Back thing. And it was because he was introduced in the holiday special that made this possible. They ended up making a figure of Boba Fett, but you had to turn in 10 proof of purchase seals from other action figures,
oh my
plus like
goodness.
postage, and then you would get the Boba Fett figure in the mail, which of course I did. So, from the very beginning, you can't really say that Boba Fett was. Travis has three, and you and I can comment on these. So one is, as long as there's a steady paycheck involved, I'll believe anything you say. Oh yeah, that was Ernie Hudson. Um, he says Moff Jerjerrod is another. Of the Imperials we met in the originals, you saw the most depth behind his eyes, I felt. He did, of course, have a much more significant role originally that was cut down. True. And then, of course, he talks about Biggs Darklighter. Crazy how adding him in a special edition makes his death feel so much sadder. And like the last part of Farm Boy, Luke has just died. Good point.
Yeah, I think to add to that, on my list I have Admiral Piet.
Oh,
um,
yes.
yes, he's like the most competent, out of the Imperial, admirals, and Vader actually took a liking to him, and he actually survived. Like, he wasn't
Yeah, I
getting
know.
choked.
That alone should
That
really.
alone, right? I was gonna say that alone, just let you
Because
know, like,
Vader was
hey,
kind of crabby during that period, People were
yeah,
getting
man, he
choked out
was,
left and right, for stuff.
yeah, he was he was not a happy camper. Not at all. Also, did I did also have Mon Mothma as well because of like she's the uh essentially the figurehead of the whole rebellion anyway.
Hmm.
And it's like she's the one who's kind of organizing everybody and pulling everyone together um, um, to fight the Empire. So, and of course, we see more of that, in Andor, which I thought that was great that they really highlighted her in that series. But um, speaking of the original trilogy, though, we're getting to see her and um, basically, like I said, just seeing her as a figurehead for the rebellion. And then I also had um, R2, just because he's constantly saving their butts, man, from stuff, man. I mean, it's like if like Luke when he his X-wing is oh this the stabilizers come on loose again. Can you lock it down? And I mean, just doing stuff like that. Um, even to unlocking a bunch of stuff, carrying the plans. I mean, Leia trusted him with the plans to begin with, and then he's having to even carry 3PO around when he got blown to bits. He's dragging him around in this little net thing in Empire. So that's when he made, oh, this is a total drag. Just such a hilarious. But yeah, man, R2, he's one of those ones, and a lot of people depended on him, but you kind of just he's a droid, he's a cute little droid, so you really don't pay that much you know attention to him in that regard as far as him advancing the story. But if you really think about like without R2, I mean those guys could have been dead a long time ago.
Oh yeah, on several occasions. Even when he, basically when they're trying to escape Cloud City, and
Oh
he knew
yeah,
what
fits
was
in the
wrong. Yeah,
hyperdrive.
fixing the
Yep,
hyperdrive because they deactivated it, but everybody said,
yep.
"Oh no," and then they thought it was broken. And he went, "Nope," and then he activated it, and they got away. So yeah, absolutely. A couple chats here. Ted says I was 12 when Empire hit, and I definitely knew who Billy D was, and I was like, "Wow, he's a cool guy." Uh, Travis is like, beautiful thing about underrated
Oh, he was
characters.
12. Wow.
Yeah, 2 years older than
So
me
oh, that's
then.
right. Oh yeah, he's I would say he's around your age then.
Yeah, a little older. I like that. Travis says the beautiful thing about underrated characters in the originals is that with Star Wars, everyone tends to look at the background characters anyway. Wedge, Boba Fett, Skippy the droid, ice cream guy. Uh,
Ice cream.
he said what the originals did especially well was make you believe the side and background characters have stake in the story and their own lives to live, the stories we're telling. Exactly. They're not what you would
That's
call in the
very
video
true.
game world, NPCs, right? Like they're not just these carbon.
Non-playable characters. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, non-playable characters. Exactly. They're just not there for just decoration or whatever. That there really is. It's part of what made the universe feel lived. He goes on to say, when the Rancor dies, the movie takes a moment to be about the Rancor keeper and the friend and his friend. When that Ewok dies, it's about that friendship that is torn apart. So yeah, I mean these are all good points, right? I mean it shows that the movie breathes, it has a little pacing. It's not just a special effects bonanza. There's real stuff going on in here. I mean,
Hmm.
I'm not going to compare the Ewok scene to like Apocalypse
Yeah.
Now or something. Like I'm not saying that this is like Oscar winning stuff here.
Right. It's not
But
Schindler's List or
for a
anything.
kid's sci-fi fantasy movie, which essentially is what Lucas intended these to be, it does have its share of depth.
Yeah. Yes, it does. Absolutely.
All right, well, that was,
Yeah, this is fun.
you know, it occurs to me now we almost should do the most overrated character of the original trilogy.
That's possibility.
Of course, I just probably made the argument for Boba Fett because I just said that, but and honestly, I don't know if I can really. That might actually be the one that I would pick
Yeah,
because I
probably.
can't. I mean, I can't think anybody offhand.
Yeah.
Anybody else that I think is like overrated.
Well, since Ted and Travis are here, and Universal, I think he's still here, hanging around. I don't know. I mean, Grandmaster will probably pop up eventually. So I wanted to give everyone a choice of what we talk about next week. Well, actually, no. 'Cause- Yeah, next week because we still have uh, the Ninth Jedi doesn't start until the fifth,
Right. So
right? Yeah.
you are correct
So
because
yeah, we still
it
have
is
one more
Tuesday and
before
not Sunday. This
Sunday,
Sunday
right?
would be our last. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
This
Got to get my
Sunday will
dates right.
be yeah. After this Sunday, we will then switch to reviewing the Ninth Jedi.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. So the choices are: we could do the same thing we did tonight with the prequel trilogy,
Huh.
or who would win in a duel? Who do you think would win in a duel between Count Dooku and Mace Windu?
So this is almost like the Duel of the Fates segment that
It
we used to have
is.
in our own show.
It is.
So who would?
We're
So
just
what?
expanding
Mace?
it to
Wait, you said Mace versus Dooku?
Dooku. Now that requires you guys to do some homework because you have to delve a little bit deeper into the characters and their fighting styles, but also um, they have a relationship too. So they kind of it's kind of a even. I would say it's kind of an evenly matched thing in a way, somewhat. But I think you might be able to find a winner. So between those two,
Well, while we're waiting for that,
or yeah,
Travis says, I think The Force Awakens had that same magic. So many side characters you want to know more about. Um, you know, Bala, Tick, and Contra Club,
and
Unkar
oh,
Plot,
kind of
so
club.
on. But then the last two films lost that. Um, yeah.
I don't know because
Basically,
then when you get I don't know because when you get to Rise of Skywalker, they introduce so many new characters.
yeah, but I think he means the ones that you would actually care about. Like, I could see what he's
Well,
talking
yeah,
about, like,
like
because in
Zora
the
Bliss for one.
well, Zori Bliss, yes.
Then you also had what's her face? Naomi Aki's character.
Oh yeah,
Um, the one with I mean when Lando was like,
right.
yeah, let's figure out who you related to.
Yeah, I know.
Everybody
And
kept saying that was Lando's daughter.
granddaughter or something. Yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
yeah, something, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even Babu Frick in a weird sort of way. Anakin
Yeah.
Skywalker Godzilla says, my old friend C3PO, Luke Skywalker, my son. Yeah, but I wouldn't say he's underrated. Travis is like, I would like to see Ewok Apocalypse now. He says the image
Martin
of
Sheen
Martin
looking.
Sheen looking Ewok popping his head out of the water is hilarious. Oh, that would be funny. Man, I should get AI to do that video actually. That would be cool. Uh Travis does answer. I don't know if this is what he's talking about, like this is what he wants. That's a good duel. Dooku says Anakin has hate and anger but doesn't use them. Mace does use them and almost took out Palpatine. He wasn't outsmarted in combat, it was interference. And then Ted also says that he wants the Dooku versus Windu thing. So it looks like, yeah, fine. We'll just do, we'll do that. We'll do Dooku versus Windu.
Windu.
Lots of
It
use.
sounds like one of those like UFC fights.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. That's actually pretty funny. So yeah, I mean that's what we'll do. We'll do, Sunday. I mean, hopefully we're not lying to you this time and we are actually on Sunday, but that's what we'll do. Count Dooku versus Mace Windu. set in stone. I kind of like it when we come up with these topics ahead of time. It's actually kind of cool.
Yeah, I'm sure it's easy. I know you like it, so now you know what to make for
I
the
like
graphic.
it. Yeah, exactly. I like it because I could just, So yeah, that'll be cool. But this is fun. I mean, this is like a nice little exercise, and it was fun because we actually had to use our heads. I mean, we could have gone with the obvious ones, I guess, but I think that both of us had really good, unique choices that weren't necessarily what I think a lot of people would go for.
Absolutely, yeah, it was definitely because it took some brain power to go through all these characters and try to figure it out.
Well, I think we got Travis started on some because he says Ewocalypse now writes itself.
Ewocalypse, hilarious.
So it's like, yeah, exactly.
See what you started, Eric.
I know. It's like a throwaway comment, too. If only you guys paid attention when I say things like, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe button.
Nice. That was great.
Join our... I can't even get this out now. Join our Discord. Maybe throw a couple bucks our way, buy me a coffee, or join, the memberships. I mean, there's a lot of things that you guys could do that help us out. But biggest thing is you keep watching, and we really appreciate it. So, yeah, I think we'll do that. We'll do that, and then after that, obviously, we'll have the whole Ninth Jedi series that will be. So, till next Sunday, guys. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.